Okay, so I wanted to reach out to you specifically. I personally, so like I do a lot of trans masculine content. That's usually like what pretty much everything that I do is centered around, is trans
Mm-hmm.
masculine content. I've talked to a lot of detransitioners, mostly in private. I've had a few people on that I've talked to like publicly, and stuff like that, because I think the perspective is really interesting. And I just like, everybody likes hearing about that kind of stuff. I think is important for us to talk about. A lot of people are uncomfortable talking about it, for a plethora of reasons. So I'm always in the market to like platform different ideas and talk to people, about different kind of things. That's kind of why I reached out to you. So if you just wanted to, like introduce yourself and talk a little bit about yourself, and then we can just spend some time chit chatting and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah. So my name is Issa. I'm 26 years old. I currently live in Michigan. I documented my transition, like the first year pretty much, from female to male. I created support groups. I did some advocating, things like that. And it got overwhelming at one point. So I kind of just focused on me. And then I was on hormones for 6 years. I am now off of hormones, going on 6 months at the end of this month. Um, and I'm in barber school. So, like, I don't really, like, I'm very consumed by that. I haven't been doing, like, a lot of advocating now. I mean, I do talk about my experience, on TikTok and YouTube and things. But as far as all of the great, amazing things that I used to do back then, I don't unfortunately do right now. But I still support all of those things. I just am focusing on me right now. So,
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So when you were transitioning, this is kind of the way that I like to look at it, because I like talking about kind of people's experiences like accessing medical care and medical
mhm.
intervention. Do you think that that was like adequate? Like, do you think that you got enough kind of like quote unquote screening, if you will? Like, did you have enough resources? Was it like kind of the right move for you at the time? Do you feel like you were kind of misled, or like how was that process for you?
Yeah. So I first had found out about like trans people and like the process of transitioning when I was 17. At that time, like I had a partner who had come out to me as trans. That was the first person that I had ever met that was trans, that I, obviously consciously knew of, because how can we ever tell, right?
Mhm.
And so that was about 10 years ago. And that was a time of like that I had just got into Tumblr. So I was seeing a lot of people talk about that process. Um, it was a whole world that was opened up to me, right? There were things that I resonated with. And from there, I kind of started to socially, like about a year or so later, I started to socially transition a bit. And then like tried to find things on YouTube, things like that. The college that I went to actually had a lot of trans people back in 2012. So I actually was like really quickly immersed in that community very easily. So from there, I could just ask people questions and things. It wasn't until like 3 or so years later when I actually decided to go on hormones. And when I did, finding a therapist was really easy for me. I found like the therapist in that area at the time that like specifically was for trans people that everyone went to. And that experience was the first experience with them was very interesting, and we can dive into that later if you'd like. But they worked specifically with a really great doctor in the area who is still my doctor now. I think she's really amazing. So all of that was very easy for me, and I was on and still am on Medicaid. As a young poor person, but it actually paid for some of my hormones and things were covered for me, so those were really great and easy. When it came to finding a surgeon, that was very easy for me. And I raised money like from being known from the documentary, things like that, to help pay for surgery. My family was supportive and help. Like everything was, I was so fortunate, like my entire transition when it came to accessibility. I was extremely fortunate, but I feel like in that moment, in those times, I got all of the information that I felt like I needed in that time.
Do you
If
feel like
that,
there wasn't like a
yeah.
counter narrative that like maybe that so like if you went to therapy with somebody, right, when you were starting to like explore your gender identity and stuff like that, if you went to therapy and other options were presented, do you think that that would have made a difference in like pursuing medical transition, or do you think that that was just kind of like where you needed to be at that time?
Yeah, so now I can actually dive into, that therapist situation. So the first therapist that I saw that ended up being the therapist in my film as well. That first day when I started to describe my feelings, their response was, if I could write you a letter today, I would, because you are trans.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually very overwhelming for me. Because this was my first time talking about it, especially with a therapist. And it was my first time seeing a therapist. So for someone to tell you who you are when you're questioning, so like it's a little overwhelming, So I didn't go back to them, actually. And I went and saw a therapist at my university, and it was a grad student. And they were really great, really nice. And we started to talk about some of my things that happened to me in my childhood. I had some childhood sexual trauma, and I never worked through that. I never saw a therapist after that. But that was one thing that she had said to me at the time was, I think you should work on some of this stuff before you add another thing to your plate. She said, I don't think that it's not, you shouldn't transition. She was like, I just think like you have some things that you need to work through first.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the answer that I wanted to hear at that time. And I didn't think that I needed to work on that, right? I was 20, 21. I'm in college. I'm on my own. I'm independent. Like I was so sure of who I was. And so I went back to that first therapist. The grad student had recommended that to me. If that was the route that I wanted to go to, I should go to that therapist. And I did. And they had said that even though I haven't seen them consistently for the last 6 months, I identified, as a trans masculine person at that time, and I still do 6 months later. So they wrote the letter for me that day. And then I waited about 2 months to see my doctor, because they just weren't accepting patients just yet. But then, and then I started hormones. So long story short, like I was presented a different idea, but for me, that wasn't it for me.
For sure. Do you think that like, I guess like, so a lot of the narrative usually, right, is that when we come to a therapist or a physician or somebody with like, I think I'm trans, like I think I might want to medically transition, I think that might be something that's right for me. Usually the argument presented is that, well, this is like a one size fits all treatment for all people. Like if you go to a therapist, like their solution is going to be access to transition. Their solution isn't going to be like maybe psychotherapy, like maybe deal with like, traumas or like underlying feelings, like maybe why do you feel this way? So I guess like approaching it from that angle, do you think that like if you knew now what you, or if you knew then, no, I'm totally butchering this. If you knew now, then, like, if you had like your brain now when you were 21, like pursuing this, do you think that that would have been like a more valuable approach instead of accessing medical transition, or do you think that that was like just what you needed at that time?
I think for me personally, yeah, probably. I analyze everything that I do. And I analyze people in general and just try and figure out why people do the things that they do. So that's naturally who I am. So if someone had asked me a little bit differently, maybe, then yeah, I probably would have, like, I could have, right? I mean, I don't actually know, but I also was very consumed with, like people and what they thought about me even more than what I am now. So even if that idea was presented, I probably was like, no, this is who I am, and I already stated it, and things like that. But yeah, I do think like it might have been different, if they actually were like, well, why do you think you feel uncomfortable in your body, or things like that, but at that time, I just didn't have the language or words. But yeah, probably I could agree with that.
Yeah, for sure. And then when you started hormones, I assume now that like, you're detransitioning and such, that there are like a lot of changes that you wish that you could have like, just not gone through with, right? Like maybe like facial hair growth or things like that, like changes that come with taking hormones. When you like started hormones, because you said that you got your letter and you went to like a physician to get hormones. were you like kind of aware of the side effects of what would happen, or was that just kind of like shooting in the dark for you?
Yeah, well, the doctor would like, so as kind of off was my therapist, my doctor was very amazing. She very much educated me on everything. Any questions I had, she had answers to. So that was really good. So I was aware of things, but, and I don't know if this is something that you can resonate with, but I was told that because I was Middle Eastern and things like that, I was going to have a very thick beard and I was going to be very hairy. And I just couldn't see that. Like, I was like, I don't believe you. And when I say like, maybe you can resonate with this, is because like before you go on hormones, you see everyone else and how they look, and you compare yourself for how you look right now. Right. And you're like, that's not possible. I can't look like that. They're just lucky. Or, you know, things, you know, you just think that you're like, you don't think good things can happen to you as well. Right. Especially when you're younger. So I just didn't think that I was going to get that masculine. And when it happened, I took every change, you know, how it came. But like, you know, I was told like, this is what it was going to look like, or this is how it was going to be. But I guess like just in that moment, I couldn't believe it until it was happening to me.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I think about it like a lot of people, and I can't speak for you, and I didn't feel this way either, but I see people that will talk a little bit about like just wanting like a little bit more of an androgynous presentation, and I don't think that a lot of people fully realize like how masculinizing testosterone can be, and how quick it can happen, like depending on your genes. Like I know some people that have been on hormones for like 10 years that still don't pass, and I know people that have been on hormones for like 6 months and they have like a full beard. It's just kind of like rolling the dice, which is kind of unfortunate that we can't just cherry pick what we would like and stuff like that.
Right.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work like
world.
that.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So like, can you talk a little bit about how you kind of like realized that transitioning wasn't right for you, and like kind of what steps you took like upon that realization, stuff like that?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm noticing the banana that I was eating is in the shot and I need to move it.
You're totally fine.
I was like, this isn't good. I was really hungry before.
I would not have even have noticed that if you didn't say anything, but you're totally fine.
I like I said, I analyze a lot of things, so I'm like constantly looking all over the place. Anyways, I apologize. Repeat your question. I was very distracted.
You're totally fine. The banana, I totally get it. So like when you started to realize that like medical transition wasn't really working for you, wasn't kind of like your thing, right? What was that process like? And then like what kind of steps did you make to pursue that? Because something else that I think is really important too, and we can talk a little bit about this later, is kind of like how like when you're transitioning, right? It's kind of like, oh, like here insurance can cover this, like here's some support for this, here's some support for that. But when you start detransitioning, it's kind of like, well, good fucking luck, right? Like you're kind of like left out to dry. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be nice.
Yeah, so this might be a little bit of a long answer, but I think it's important to have like the background to
No
it,
worries.
right? So I would say after my 1 year on hormones, like around that time, I was like extremely happy, extremely comfortable with my body. I felt like a lot of gender euphoria, excuse me. And it felt really good, and I liked how I looked, and I was a little androgynous around that time. So after I started to get really, really masculine, and for me, I'm attracted to all people, no matter gender and all of that. So as I started to get really masculine, certain situations that I was in, I was getting treated differently, right? Of course. And I dated a lot of like feminine people, and I felt like my masculinity had to come out more with that, right? And so as I would date maybe like cis women, because I was so masculine, so, you know, passing, I don't really like using that word, but they, a lot of times, like, I still felt connected to like my feminine side and could understand them in a different level, but they would treat me like a cis male. And you would think like, isn't that what I wanted, right? But like, it just made me feel uncomfortable. And then as I got more masculine, I just further felt uncomfortable in my body, whether it was just like social interactions or like romantic interactions, you know, anything like that. Like, and I couldn't figure out why. I didn't know why I felt so uncomfortable. It was like, I kept trying to think, I'm like, do I have this like inner homophobia? Am I like this inner transphobia? Like, what is it that's making me so uncomfortable? And I was really depressed for a really long time. Um, and when the pandemic hit, like I was just by myself. I was like completely alone. And I started to do some inner child work and did some hypnotherapy and was microdosing psilocybin. Like I was like anything to cure my depression. I was like, I don't care what it is, I'm gonna try it because I'm at that last point. And one day I was just sitting there like at my grandparents' house and I was like, the thought and I wasn't thinking about anything specific, but just randomly a thought popped up in my head and was like, you don't have to be on hormones for the rest of your life. And it was like I'd never thought about that before. And it was like this brand new idea that like I had just come up with. But the way that I felt when I said those words in my head, I knew. And from there was when I was like, okay, I need to figure out what this means, right? Because I'm questioning my entire identity for the last 6 years, right? I was so sure of this. So it was really terrifying and it was really scary. And you're right, there isn't a lot of things about detransitioning online. And there really wasn't anything that, and maybe you can feel this way as well, as like, you know, when maybe you came out or you were like looking for someone that looked like you or someone who had a very similar experience to you, you know, to kind of connect and see what that journey could possibly look like. Like that's what I did with transitioning. I would find trans men who maybe could like look like me or whatever, and I could kind of see what that looked like, right? Well, I couldn't find any of that, so I was really terrified. But I was like, well, I know the first step is going off of hormones. And so this was, I guess this is a year ago, this time last year. And I only went off of hormones for like 4 months. And I started to date someone who was very feminine. And I felt really insecure at that time. So I was really dependent on that partner and their validation, right? And because they were so hyper feminine, I felt like my masculinity had to come out again. And this is one thing about me, and I don't know if you've ever felt this, but sometimes through my transition, you know, I would think about love, right? And I was like, or like people would tell you like no one's gonna love a trans person, or you know, just very negative things, right? And so every time I would receive love from someone, I thought that was gonna be my last.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I was trying so hard to make this relationship work, and I was so unhappy with myself, right? And we broke up, and you know, whether it be good or bad or whatever, it was good because I didn't need to be with someone at that part of my life. So I went back on. I was on hormones for another 6 months. And oh, sorry, I heard something in the background.
Oh, you're totally fine. My wife is playing Kingdom Hearts like right here.
Oh, okay.
So you're totally fine.
That's okay. But yeah, so like, you know, I went on hormones again for another 6 months. But and then I was like, I got to a point where I was like wanting to be feminine, but not being able to because I had this identity, and I was like, I'm just gonna go off of hormones. And so I told my doctor, and she was like, well, yeah, like that's all you need to do, like, is just go off of hormones and take it day by day. And so that's like, you know, the longer story to like how I came to the decision, you know, to be where I'm at right now.
So when you were thinking about like going off of testosterone, is it for you, is it like an identity thing, or is it just kind of like with the hormones in your system kind of thing? Because I know people that have detransitioned because they don't want to take substances into their body anymore, and then some people just don't identify with like being trans anymore, or maybe they just don't identify with, you know, like gender at all, and they just don't care, and it's more fluid. What is that like for you?
Yeah, I would think number one is I didn't want to be on medication anymore. That was my biggest thing. I did not, I'm very terrified of needles. I have tattoos, yes, but
it's different. I totally feel you.
It's completely different.
It's different,
right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm glad you understand, and I don't have.
I have the same thing. So people are like, "Oh, but you have a shit ton of tattoos," and it's like it's not comparable. They're not even the same. But yeah.
Right. So that was the biggest thing, and so the thought of like never having to do that again in my life was like, I was like, yes, everything, right? And then the other thing was I was like, I don't feel like a trans man. I finally realized that I was like, I don't feel like a man. And I've never felt like a man which there's a lot of foreshadowing in my documentary. It's very interesting. But I was like, I just don't feel like a man. And like that didn't resonate with me. And I lived as a man for 6 years. And I was like, okay, I know what this experience is like. And this is not an experience that I want to have for the rest of my life.
Did you ever consider maybe doing like different methods of testosterone? Like if you did like gels or patches, or they have like the little pellets now and stuff like that? Or was it just the, you know, like the monotony of like taking it forever, do you think?
Yeah, I think it was, for the taking it forever. But also I'm bad with medication. Like injections are so strong that even if I missed a couple of weeks or whatever, it didn't make that big of a difference. I did think about going on gel or something because I was already so masculine anyways, that I was like, I know I'm not changing much more, but I still was like the last like year or two at like 5-6 years, like there was like a big jump again. It was like 1 year, and then it was like 2 to 3 years, and then it was like from that to 6 years, it was like, whoa. So yeah. Yeah,
something that's weird that I feel like not a lot of people think about is like puberty takes like 8 years on average. So we're still like developing and changing with hormones like well into our transition. It's not just like 2 years and then you're done.
Right.
So another question I have is like, so you talk about not just like not being good with medication, like not liking needles, the monotony of like being on a medication for the rest of your life and stuff like that. What was it like with your gender identity during like that time? Because, you know, like you could still be like a trans individual and not take hormones and stuff like that. Like how does that kind of fit in with like how you identify now and like how things have changed?
Yeah. So I've thought like, I guess like right now, because obviously I don't know how I'm going to feel in a couple years from now. But right now at the moment, being only 6 months off of hormones, I don't want to dive into any identity. I've done that. It hasn't been good for me, and I need to just kind of live in this freedom. But like I said, I was like, I don't feel like a transgender man, but I don't feel like a cis woman, and I don't feel like if I have to pick, I would say non-binary, but I just want to be like a soul in a human body.
Just like chill for a little bit. Yeah.
Right. Like I just like, but also just like, there's all of this. I mean, you've seen my page, you know, like you were never trans, you're not trans, you know, things like that. And then people fight over it. And then it's like, what I don't like is like, I had my entire experience as a transgender man, right? And someone's like, you were never trans. And then someone says they're non-binary, so they're still trans. And they're like, oh, okay. And I don't like that. I don't like that, okay, you have this very negative viewpoint of you, but then just because someone says I'm non-binary, now you're okay with that. Yeah. It's like that. You know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's kind of, so part of it I think is the idea, and this is a critique that I have of the trans community at large, is like the way that we treat detransitioners is like pretty shitty, right, in general. And I think a lot of it is the idea that it's like a no true Scotsman fallacy, right? Like just because you are, you know, detransitioning, you were never trans. Therefore, like, it like preserves the integrity of the group. So like,
right.
It's kind of like the idea that like Jessica Yaniv isn't trans. Like Jessica Yaniv can be an awful person, but still be trans, right? And it's like, you can still like not take hormones and you can still no longer pursue medical transition and like still be trans. Like that doesn't mean you were never trans. You were faking it, or like you were transgender, things like that. That's really shitty. And then also like the identity politics behind it, where it's like, well, you're detransitioning, but you're detransitioning and you're like still non-binary, so it doesn't count. Like I don't hate you. It's just kind of like a lot of it's just kind of like a clusterfuck. And I think a big problem of that is like a lot of people who do detransition turn into those people that are like, well, medical transition wasn't right for me, therefore it's not right for anyone, and no one should be able to access it. And that's usually what people will ascribe to detransitioners, even if they don't necessarily believe it, right? And like I think that's where that hostility comes from, but it's so toxic. Like I hate it personally, but yeah, that's an unfortunate experience, definitely.
Yeah, so that's why I guess like, it's not that I'm like, I don't want to be a part of the trans community and I don't want to be a part of the cis community. It's just like the labels are just extremely overwhelming to me. And I know like it's like, I always say this, I'm like, I know it might sound weird to people because it sounds weird to me, because I'm like, why can't I just like feel comfortable in a word? But for some reason, there's so much meaning put to these words that it makes me feel uncomfortable because I don't resonate with them 100%. And I've never found really a word that I resonate with 100%. But that's because we put so much specific meaning to like a trans man, or, you know, like we stereotype all of these labels and identities of like, this is exactly what it looks like. And so maybe that's why there's not a lot of people that feel them so strongly. And then we create so many more identities and pronouns and things like that, which if that's what makes you happy and that feels comfortable for you, 100%. But we're just like further boxing ourselves into just smaller boxes.
Yeah, that's something that can be difficult to navigate for sure. And like,
Yeah.
I totally get like labels aren't really for everybody, and labels are kind of weird, right? And like for some people they really like them and some people don't. And I think that just respecting that difference is like the most important thing that like people can take
Right.
away from anything is like if you don't like the label, then don't use it for yourself. Like that's fantastic. Like do you, right? I think people's problem is that they assume because like somebody doesn't like a label or whatever, it's like condemnation of their own. Like there's just kind of like a lot of
Right.
implications that come with it, which is difficult to navigate on both ends of the spectrum, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Like, I think like when I say things like that, people think that I'm just like they'll go straight to be like, so do you think trans people are valid? And I'm like, yes, I think everyone is valid in whatever identity or anything that like, there were moments where community and labels and identity were really good for me because I found people that resonated with me. So I totally understand why we create these things. I just think for me personally, because I felt like a very fluid person, it boxed me in.
Definitely.
And I feel like sometimes it can box a lot of very expressive people in. And that's regardless of being trans or not, like just in any kind of box of a label or identity. If
Yeah,
that makes
definitely.
sense, you know?
No,
Like,
for sure. Because you want to like look for the one that kind of fits you best so you can relate to other people. Like, and so sometimes you'll just like
Right.
grab whatever is the one that sounds like the most accurate, even if that isn't really how you feel. Definitely. I can see what you're
Right.
saying with that. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit, and just because I'm curious, because everybody seems to have like a different kind of understanding of this, especially like detransitioning people. Do you think, and this is just me, my personal curiosities, do you think that like access to medical transition is like too easy? Or do you think that like, because I know a lot of, we talked about it a little bit earlier, how a lot of detransitioners will jump the ideological fence to like, well, nobody should transition because it wasn't right for me. Do you think that like as far as like transgender identity politics and politics in general is concerned, do you think that medical transition is too easy to access, it's okay, or it should be more heavily restricted? Like how do you feel about that, like looking back now with the perspective that you have now on transition?
Yeah, you know, for me, that feels kind of hard to answer because I know a lot of people that had a really hard time trying to access it, and I know people that had a really easy time trying to access it. So it's hard to say that because it's been different for so many people, right? Like I would say, yeah, there's some places that it's a lot easier with informed consent, things like that. And there's some places where they don't have any kind of access, no doctors near them, no anything. So it's really hard to like, or like not even no doctors or anything around them, but like even the doctors they do see are like no, or their insurance doesn't cover it, or they don't have money to, like there's so many different reasons, right? So when it comes to like that, like I like to think that everyone is doing the right decision for themselves in that moment, and who am I to say that they are or they aren't, you know? Like
Yeah.
that makes me look like an asshole because I have no idea what's going on in their life and what they're feeling. Like we can only tell someone, right? Like how hard this is for us. Like we need to be on hormones or anything like that. Like what are you going to call them, a liar? You know, like you can't do that because their feelings are valid. So, and that's my answer if it's an answer.
No, definitely. Like
Yeah.
I just know a lot of people that feel like they kind of got in a little bit too easy, and so like as a result of that they kind of want to make it more rigorous for other people to access, which I think is like kind of shitty, you know? Like if somebody is under the predilection that this is what's right for them, they're going to go out of the way, above, under, around, like all kinds of obstacles in order to access that. So that's just
Right.
that's just kind of like my thought on it, and I was curious what your thought was on it, like, you know, looking back in hindsight, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like I mean, for people who feel that way, I just don't get it, you know? Like
Hmm.
it's just because you had your experience doesn't mean everyone's going to have the same exact experience as you. So, but then also like, why do something that can negatively impact a large group of people? You know what I mean? Like in that way, to be like, no, this has to happen like that. Like, you know, like to push for that. Like, why would you do that? Because everyone, it just, I don't know. Yeah, I just think it's interesting when people feel that way about any kind of issue.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of hard to make like blanket kind of prescriptions for like really diverse
Yeah,
people, and especially stuff like you were talking about, like in some areas there's just no access. So making it
right,
harder doesn't really do anything for those people, right? Like literally nothing. It has
right,
no effect at all.
right.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that's definitely like a good position to have. I would totally agree with that. I guess my other question regarding that would be like if you, and I kind of asked this earlier, but I am curious if you think that there would be like, if there was something that was like an obstacle for you to encounter, like when you were pursuing medical transition, would there be anything that you think could have deterred you from like pursuing that? Like maybe if it was, you know, too hard to get, like if you had to see another doctor, or like if you had to produce another letter or things like that, is there something that like may have deterred you from that? Or do you think it was kind of like we talked about earlier, one of those things that was just right for you at the time?
Um, yeah, like it was right, like it was right for me at the time. But I mean, so I can use this as like a real life example, right? I was actually going to get a hysterectomy, and I had scheduled it as early as I think it was like 2016 going into 2017. And I'm a very spontaneous person too when it comes to like just having experiences as far as like moving, traveling, things like that, right? And I was like, I want to get out of Michigan. And I just moved to New Orleans. So I couldn't schedule my hysterectomy. And I came back, and I just like, I didn't have money when I came back from New Orleans. So I was like, I don't have time to take off of work. So I need to keep working, right? I tried to schedule my hysterectomy again. And then I moved back to New Orleans. Don't ask me why. Moved back again. And I was like, okay, I'm going to schedule this hysterectomy again. And I got a good job where I had insurance, scheduled it, pandemic hit. And then I was like, okay, try and reschedule it. They had to extend it again. And then I was going to get it in August of last year. And I decided to go off of hormones a couple months prior. So there was obstacles that were just life things, right? That kept deterring me. And I finally kind of like, for me, that was something that I felt like, okay, I need to listen to this. There's a reason why it didn't, like, it kept getting put off. Even if I put it off, there's a reason why, right? But at the time when I took my hormone, like when I went to go get hormones and top surgery, nothing could stop me. Everything happened how it happened. It happened very, like I got top surgery like 8 or 10 months after I started hormones. Got my name changed 6 months after starting hormones. Like everything was so easy for me. So I listened to that, you know?
Yeah, just kind of like it sounds like cliche, but just kind of like if it was supposed to happen, it would happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. That definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
For sure. The only other question that I had, and this is just pure curiosity on my part, is there a reason that you talked to Benjamin Boyce specifically? Because he's kind of like a jerk, personally, from my experience with him.
Well, you know, what happened was he contacted me.
Okay.
He contacted me, and I saw him talking to Buck Angel.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I gathered from it was I felt like Benjamin gave him the platform to like really talk. And so I looked at it like that. I was like, oh, fair. It's not like he's, you know, digging in on him. He's just letting Buck speak about his experience, and he's just curious about it. So that's what I gathered from him.
Yeah, for sure. He platforms like a lot of.
But I didn't know anything really about him. Is that bad? I didn't really.
No, you're totally. I was just curious because Benjamin Boyce platforms just like a lot of gender critical people, and honest, and in a lot of like uncharitable ways. And so I was just kind of curious about like why him specifically, just based on the people that he talked to in the past. But that makes sense. I mean, I was just curious. That was my own morbid curiosity.
Yeah. I did notice that, like, I mean, I got a lot of negative comments on my video, but that's because I am like this. Like, I'm like, everyone should be able to do what they need to do that makes them happy. And a lot of people don't like that answer, especially people who are like, no hormones, no this, you know? But I'm like, who are you to tell me how I feel? Like, but I did
Definitely.
notice I got a lot of negative things. And because I'm very new to the internet, I feel like I needed to defend myself to like literally every person, which I don't need to do that. But I'm a human. So, of course, I feel those things. But I know like if there's someone like when even when I watched your like stuff before I talked to you, like I agreed with a lot of things. Like I told you, which I saw the video with you and Calvin. There's just like a lot of points that you agreed that I agreed with you on.
Hmm.
And I could see, and I liked that you were just very logical about a lot of the things. It wasn't, and very just like, this is what it is, so I appreciated that, and that's what I liked about, yeah, wanting to talk to you. So yeah, yeah, who knows who else I'm gonna talk to, but I mean, hopefully, like this was good for you and answered questions and things.
Yeah,
It felt very
definitely.
calm.
I am a pretty calm person. A lot of people think that I'm
Yeah.
kind of an asshole. I can be, but I'm usually a very nice person. I just think it's interesting because a lot of people who are detransitioning, from like my perspective, obviously, like, I would be considered like a trans rights activist. Like, I'm on that side of the aisle, you could say.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of the problems that I see, or a lot of people who detransition, are kind of like weaponized to fight, like gender critical people's fight for them, right? So you come out as, you're like, hey, I'm going to step hormones. I don't want to transition anymore. It wasn't right for me. And then you look at the trans community, and the trans community says, you were never really trans. You're fake. You're making all of us look bad. Blah, 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 blah. You look this way and you see like a group of people who were like, hey, like those people, they kind of pressured you into being trans. Why don't you come over here and hang out with us? And, we can talk about how, like hormones are dangerous, right? Like, look at what they did to you. They ruined your life. Like this, that,
Right.
and the other thing. And these people are kind of weaponized to fight that fight for them. And it's like, well, how can you look at this person and delegitimize their experience? It's kind of like the ultimate win for them, so to speak. So I like talking to detransitioners, and I especially like the idea of like, and this sounds like kind of shitty, right? Like, I think that everybody's experiences are like important, right? But I think that there's like a prevalence of people who are detransitioners who are platformed in a negligent way that are used to like weaponize allowing people to transition. And so I think it's important to like try and talk to people and be like, yo, like, do you actually think this? Like, do you actually think that, nobody's really trans
Right.
and it's a cult and this, that, and the other thing? I think that responsible platforming is really important. And that's one of the big reasons that I wanted to talk to you for sure. Because I think that your perspectives are like really refreshing. And I
Yeah.
definitely enjoy it for sure.
That's good. Yeah, I've been thinking about this very like a lot too, and not just specific to people who detransition, but like this is what sparked the idea, right? Is like when they say that they feel like regretful or like guilty that they like transitioned and detransitioned, or like shame and things like that. I feel like the reason that they feel that way is because people made them feel that way. And I think like there's so many things that we can look at in our past, right, that are negative or weren't right for us. And to feel shame and guilt and regret and all of these things for that there's literally nothing you can change about it. It's just going to make your life a lot worse. And then seeing the beauty in that, because at one point you wanted to do that. That was right for you. You were happy about it. No one was injecting you weekly or, doing these things
Hmm.
for you, like you consciously were like, this is the right decision for me. And just because that changes, it doesn't mean that it's bad or it's wrong or invalidates you, like you're a human, you just changed. And so like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel really bad for the people who feel that shame and regret for those things, because like I said, you can look at someone who was a drug addict, that might have been a really bad time for them. But if you are a better person and you accept yourself and your faults and all the things that you are today, like you have to move on from it. You have to just accept as this is what's happened. You've changed and now this is your life, and make your life even more beautiful and love yourself even more from it, whatever your journey is.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I just think like I think like the people who detransition who feel that way just need a little bit. Oh, sorry, my camera went out. I'm not sure.
Oh no, you're so
Um,
good. I still got you. You're good.
but the people who feel that way, like they just need to work on a little bit more self love. And I just feel bad that I'm like, because I know that feeling when you feel shame and hate for yourself.
Yeah,
So I
definitely.
think it's more than that, than them just being like, don't transition. Like there's something internal going on. You
Yeah,
know.
I definitely
So,
agree. I think that's like a really important perspective too, because I think of it in like the context of, like if I were to detransition, like maybe who knows, like all things are possible, right?
right.
Like I would look at it as like I can't really like look at anything that like helped me develop like a sense of self or like a better understanding of myself and consider that to be like a bad thing. Like even bad things that have happened to me or like negative experiences that I've had, bad relationships,
Mm-hmm.
bad choices that I've made. They're all just like opportunities to grow and kind of like reflect and
Yep.
change and like make better choices in the future or whatever, right? And I can't imagine like looking back on something. I can still be like, damn, like that sucked. I wish that didn't happen, but like I understand myself so much more now because that happened. Like
Right.
that kind of framing I think is really important, and I think it gets lost a lot because we want to think that like this is the right choice for me. I'm always right 100% of the time. Nothing I can do is
Mm-hmm.
wrong, right? And we kind of approach it from that situation, which makes it difficult to navigate for sure.
Yeah, I 100 everything you just said. Yes. Like you have to just accept it. It's like when you get a flat tire, right? And you're like, "Oh, I wish I changed that tire before," but it's like you didn't know that. Like you just have to. I know that's like a very like that probably wasn't the best example to like. I wasn't
But
trying to
yeah,
denounce like transitioning, but you know what I
yeah,
mean. Like
hmm
literally, you can equate it to anything in your life. So yeah, I hope like I think by putting out my content, it has helped a lot of other people who have detransitioned or are thinking about it look at it in a more positive perspective.
yeah, definitely.
So that's why I share my stuff. I'm like, you guys, like, yeah, life is hard and we change and do things that we're like, why the hell did we do that? But like, just love yourself today and figure it out later. Stop putting the pressure on having to decide right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. I
You
really,
know?
I really appreciate
Yeah.
you taking the time to come and hang out and answer my questions and talk and stuff like that.
No.
Your perspective is very refreshing, and I'm really happy that you took time out of your day to spend time with me on a Sunday, on a nice Sunday.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Yeah, I've been nervous about different interviews that I've been contacted by, and I didn't know where this was going to go, but like I told you earlier, like I was like, I agree with you on a lot of things. I am happy that you gave me the platform to like, you have such a platform that is very specific to trans people, right? And on the
Mhm.
masculine side of the spectrum, probably mostly. And that's where I get a lot of my negative comments from sometimes. So it's like it's nice that I was able to kind of like explain myself a little bit more in depth. It's not a 15-second video on TikTok,
Absolutely, definitely.
you know.
Yeah,
But
it's
thank you, yes,
important.
for taking the time to. I do appreciate it. Hopefully we could talk again soon or something.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always down to talk, and I will be sure to plug your YouTube and your TikTok. If there's anything else that you want me to plug, you can just send it to me in a DM, and I can copy and throw the link in there too. And yeah,
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 those should be good. Yeah, because from there people can find my other links and stuff. So,
yeah, for sure.
but yeah, okay. Thanks so much, Malcolm. You have a great night.
Yeah, absolutely. You too. Have a good one.